Great. So as Heather said, originally I trained in Western Australia, but 18 years ago I came here for a couple of months OE with some friends travelling, and it was my first ever job as a general practitioner, because up till then I'd been doing hospital work, and I learned all my general practice in New Zealand, and I studied as a normal GP for the first sort of 6 years, if you like, conventional. And during that time, I always had an interest in nutritional medicine, or how can we prevent things. In fact, even as a young doctor in the hospital, I always thought, how can I prevent this person coming back all the time with this, gallbladder pain, or this overdose, or this whatever's going on for them. It just seemed like there was a lot of revolving door in the hospitals. So I went out into the community to kind of have a look at what we could do to prevent things. And from there, I did a lot of training in nutritional medicine, which is where you look at postgraduate, how to help the body with its natural biochemistry. Professor Shaw's has given us a fantastic talk on the biochemistry of the body related to breast cancer, and bio comes from the word life, and so it's sort of chemistry of life. And I'm going to give you a bit of a look at that area, as well as the bigger picture of what can you practically do as a person for your own health or for the ones that you love. So we'll look at that. I think I've got about 50 minutes to do that, and then I'm on a plane to Melbourne. Okay, good. All right, so the balance of life. So it's a bit of a different approach. You've been looking at genes and stem cells and that, which is fantastic, and I will be talking about that. But just remember that life is something that you create. You're creating your body, and in an ideal state, it's creating its cells, it's creating its... the body is creating a healthy state, or homeostasis, as we learn about. Homeostasis just means keeping it in a condition of balance. And if there's something suppressing you in the environment, we've heard about chemicals, but it can be someone. It can be, bad news, finance worries, unfaithful partners, unhappy relationships, injustices, decisions where you feel your own integrity was changed. These things can actually impact on health. And it's something that we don't often think about in medicine. We focus on the body, but we tend to forget about the fact that 1 in 10 women gets breast cancer, but 9 in 10 women don't. So why do the 9 in 10 don't and the 1 does? Or why do sort of 20% of people get ill and the rest don't? Or even though we're all exposed to chemicals, how come we're getting unwell? And some are and some aren't, and is it just genes, or what's going on? So it was good to hear about Lamarck and Darwin, because that was a very key concept that, when you're in medical school, you learn about the sort of Darwin side of things. And I remember sitting in classes learning about experiments to do with genes and things like that, and thinking, I think there's probably a bit more to this in life, but anyway. But this is a sort of a ancient concept. It comes back from even the Vedic hymns, in India, where there's a cycle of life where in the beginning you create, and then you survive, which is creation. And then at the end, there's some counter-creation against your body and you die. And that's a sort of an ongoing cycle, which through the generations of creativity, you see changes. And Professor Shaw was saying, we change things generation to generation to adapt so that we can survive. And in the area of autism in children, there's some really good work being done on that as well. How through sort of 3 or 4 generations in New Zealand, the rates of autism in children have gone up incredibly. So what's happened to that sort of expression between the mum and the child? And it's not just a sort of black and white on-off thing. It's a spectrum of health, incredible health at the top and not so healthy at the bottom. So holistic health has this sort of broader view of, the spiritual side, or you. So your ideas or thoughts being a senior aspect in your health, having some kind of purpose to live. The idea is Shakespeare, Hamlet was having a hard time, right? He was, to be or not to be, that is the question, right? Whether it is nobler in the mind, So the concept of, do you want to be in created life, or are you at the end of a life, or succumbing, or feeling not so well? There's the emotional mind, which I think you're going to do some work on this afternoon. And there's the harmonics of negative emotions. So you'll often find around cancer there's fear and some anger and suppressed grief and sort of environmental losses and situations that have come up that contribute. So we've got this balance of pleasure and pain in life. Then you've got the body, which they're actually finding the body it's a carbon-oxygen engine with these fantastic protein sugar switches called the DNA that switch on and off with these various processes that actually is surrounded by an energy field. And there's a lot of work, probably some of you have been to Bruce Lipton's talks, but there's a bioenergetic field around the body which is impacted by traumas and accidents and injuries, and that all impacts on your health as well. And then we get to the cellular structure, which we've been talking about today, which is the DNA, and it has this ability to get damaged and repair itself, or be repaired by the mechanisms of the body. And it's keeping all that in balance, so we're going to look at how to do that. So this is, Mimi Irwin's a GP, and she loves looking at different things, and I was at her house one day, and she showed me this book by a Japanese man called Emoto, and it had photos of snowflakes, and I was like, okay, that's interesting. But I just thought I'd show it as an example of does your thought or your mind or yourself have something to do with your health? And here is a dam in Japan, the water from the dam, right? And apparently Mr. Emoto loves this dam, but it's before Buddhist prayer is a snowflake on the left, and after Buddhist prayer is the pattern that the snowflakes make after the prayer. So this is heavy metal music on the left and Imagine music by John Lennon. So you can have a bit of a look at his stuff. He actually takes these wonderful photos of snowflakes and exposes them to different concepts and things. But the body is basically a cellular matrix, like a complex structure, and a lot of it is responding to harmonics of energy, and you could say negative energy or however you want to do that. Here is some words that he played to the water, if you like, or said to the water. This is the words, "You disgust me," as opposed to love and gratitude. So it's just interesting when you think about the health of yourself. Then we come to this interesting concept of energy around the body, and they're starting to do more work with the biofield or energy patterns, the effect of trauma, injuries. I mean, from a practical point of view, I had a patient with anal cancer, and she had a trauma to that area many years earlier, and then some time after that developed a small tumour just next to the scar where her original injury had been, and that went on to become anal cancer. And you could say, well, does that relate somehow to that? She was otherwise, very healthy, and something in that field had affected that area and its ability to heal. There's this cellular and extracellular matrix. So we look a lot at the cells and what's in the cells, but you've also got communication systems between them. So if you have an injury to your knee or to your body or to your some areas of your body, it's been studied a lot in Chinese medicine, things like that, the various meridians of energy and flows. But the basic concept is that the body is in communication. It has endocrine systems, it has a nervous system, it has electrical flows within and without it. These are all monitored by, sodium, potassium pumps and hormones and communication systems. So if one area of the body is not in good communication with the rest of the body, you can imagine that area could become diseased or become more influenced by chemicals than someone else, So that's just something to look at. How do you restore communication to the body? All right, so specifically breast cancer. So how common is it? We know that it's about 1 in 10 New Zealand women. Every day there are about 8 women diagnosed in New Zealand. Every year there are about 3,000 women diagnosed. And interestingly enough, only sort of 5 to 10% are in that hereditary BRCA gene that you've probably heard about. The risk of breast cancer increases with age, and about 5% of the cases are under 40 as we get older, which I think was alluded to this morning. Less women are dying because we're actually doing these interventions and they're tending to stay alive. So what does this tell us? It tells us that the breasts are susceptible to the influence of environmental factors, and we just heard a brilliant talk about some of those environmental influences switching on and off at a cellular level. There's more breast cancer after the hormones decrease, which we've heard from both earlier speakers, which tends to sort of go against the idea of the hormones causing cancer, but there is that controversy about what you do around hormones. And also it tells us we haven't got the problem sorted yet because there's 8 cases a day. So what do we currently do with breast cancer in medicine? We try and detect it early through teaching women to examine themselves, screening programs, biopsying what we find that doesn't look very good. We do surgery, we take the lumps out, we check the nodes, we look at the tissues to see if they're receptor positive for estrogen and progesterone and a substance called Herceptin. And we basically then go on to use things like radiation, chemicals. Now the chemicals are designed to damage the DNA further so the cell actually dies, but they damage the weaker cancer cell in preference to the healthy cells, but you still get some healthy damage, as you know. But it's based around these cancer cells are in a sort of overgrown, weak state, not really doing their chemistry properly, so how can we knock them off? And then you have targeted drug therapies where you use clever technology like antibodies to attach to cells, and then the body can recognize them and kill them. And we have things that block hormones, like tamoxifen and injections. Okay, so what do these medical treatments tell us? They tell us that the breast has a tendency to get this DNA damage and cell damage and changes in the stem cells, and the very cells that are in that breast can be affected. Interestingly, the breast a lot of it is fatty tissue, and the fats are the depository for toxins in the body, and often the breast is a storage site for toxins. So if you were to look at our world with 8,000 potential toxins that can affect the breast, it's no wonder that they get quite an exposure. They're designed to concentrate all the healthy fat, make it into milk for breastfeeding, but they also become liable because they are a storage deposit place. As I said, cancer cells are unhealthy, and they produce too many receptors for things like Herceptin and estrogen and progesterone. Remember that they're damaged, so they're overproducing these hormone receptors. It doesn't mean that hormones are bad, it just means that those cancer cells can be stimulated by hormones. And this drug Herceptin is something that actually attaches and blocks the tumour growth factors that happen, and a lot of women are using these more expensive, if you like, medications to try and block that growth of the tumour cell and get the cells to die. We know that radiation can damage and kill cells. It's a funny thing, radiation, because on one hand it can cause tumours, and on the other we use it to kill the weaker cells and to try and clean up an area. So it's sort of a double-edged sword. We know that toxic chemicals can kill off cells, but we also know they can create cancer, but we try to kill more than we are creating. We know that folic acid metabolism is important to cell health, and some of the treatments actually use that, and we'll talk a bit about that later. So far we know how to block hormones and encourage cell death and use cell toxic chemicals, radiation and surgical removal. So we've kind of got quite a way to go, really, haven't we? Like over the next 20 years, it'd be nice to see therapies that are a bit more targeted and more preventive, and that don't have quite such a fallout of damage and injury. I mean, even from the previous generations, you would have said the large radical mastectomy versus the lumpectomies now, the large radiation burns versus the smaller burns, the incredible side effects from chemotherapy versus some of the targeted chemo. So we're trying to go in the direction of less damage, but it's still fairly side effect ridden. So here's the DNA's protein. It's also got some glycoprotein or glucose in there as well. We've heard about that. It helps make copies of cells. And so ideally we want the breast cells to keep dividing and make healthy cells. Yeah. No, it's right. It's more a complex structure, isn't it? Yeah.
It's not protein at all.
What is it? Amino acids or nucleotides?
Foods and bases. I just wanted to correct.
Bases. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I would fail my chemistry exam on that point, I think. That's all right. So, and the bases are made out of?
Well, they are bases.
Yeah.
They're sugars, basically, and bases.
Sugars and bases. Okay, good. Is there nitrogen in them at all? Or?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's nitrogen in the bases of the DNA and some sugar. So that's where I was thinking along the lines of that. But basically, it gets damaged, and we want to see why does it create lumps. So DNA is a base protein substance with nitrogen in it and sugars, and it's damaged, and we can actually repair it, okay? So what damages the DNA? Well, we know radiation damages it, right? So excess radiation, you've only got to look at things like, World War II with the atom bomb on Hiroshima and the children and so on that were born after that. Nuclear radiation experiments. And we've got the situation with the ozone layer and skin cancers and exposure to radiations. So flying long haul is one of those things where people go, you can get exposed to radiation over time. And there's this whole field of phones and electrical power lines and gadgets and microwaves and electric blankets. And is it healthy to be in this electrical environment all the time? The DNA is also damaged by toxins. And you'll see that the fat cells are basically these storage deposits for toxins. There's toxins that end up in those near the cells and near the cellular tissues, okay? So often it's those duct cells of the actual lining of the tubes where you get the milk and the glandular tissue that changes. A cigarette smoke would be an example of that. Petrochemicals. Since World War II, there's been over sort of 50,000 patents for various chemicals, and Prof. Shaw was talking about in developed countries, we've developed the technology in chemistry to come up with an amazing range of sprays and chemicals and insecticides and various things, but it's had a consequence for us. And the plastic technology, parabens and all these xenoestrogens that he was talking about, they get in through the skin, they get in through the gut, and they do affect things as we've seen. So there's a lot of chemicals in and around the home, in the car, the carpets, etc. And then there's toxic metals. So we've had an industrial revolution. We used a lot of mercury. Did anyone here go through the murder house or their mum? So you know what I mean. The dental nurse who was learning how to fill your teeth with the mechanically operated drill, who then filled your teeth as a child with a lot of mercury, which amalgam fillings, which were 50% mercury. And mercury vaporizes. It's toxic. It displaces other metals in your body, like zinc and selenium get used up that protect you against cancers. It also passes across the placenta along with lead to the child. So you may find the firstborn child, the secondborn child gets less of a load. Mum offloads these toxins into the fetus. And there's the whole thing of coal fires, the coal industry, tuna, the levels of mercury in that, the use of leaded petrol when we were in the 70s and 80s, leaded paints, and then the uranium-plutonium situation with like Japan and places in Russia where they basically had disasters with nuclear radiation going into the atmosphere. So you start to think, well, no wonder we're having a bit of trouble, right? That's right. And then we get into the sort of toxic food section, which I think Peter talked some about the glucose side, but there's inflammation. So there's this concept that cancer is basically inflammation in the body. It's something that's making your body go through a cascade of reactions that's switching on and off these various genes and using up various key nutrients and stretching things to a place where things are unhealthy and you can't repair your DNA enough, and then you get an overgrowth of these cells. So, excess alcohol there's graphs about, how many drinks do women have compared to rates of breast cancer with age, and you've got these, 2 drinks is this level, 4 drinks this level, 6 drinks this level type of trends. So there's sort of sugar and carb overload. Then there's a whole area of fats, which I think there'll be more work done over the next sort of 10 years. And we were all told in the 80s that fat is evil, we should get off fat. And so margarine became the in thing and butter was evil. Do you remember that? Yeah. And then they're finding that these trans fats are made under incredibly high pressure with these bonds and hydrogens inserted, and rancid oils and some of the vegetable oils like canola, which are used very broadly to fry up your burgers and your chips and fish and chips and so on. They're actually getting into the cells and having damaging effects. So you could clean up those things in your diet. There's the concept of the overcooked black barbecued sausages, the fry-ups and the fast-fried foods, and then there's some work being done on A1 milk and homogenized dairy, and also the toxins that go into milk because it is a basically a fat-based drink that comes through, and what is in a non-organic milk that we have xenoestrogens and other chemicals. So we'll just have a look at China, because China had one of the lowest rates of breast cancer in the whole world. And lately they've been getting a lot of breast cancer increasing, so I just took some things from there. They've been looking at it as a country going, what do we do about this? So this is some of the work from a fellow that was looking into breast cancer in China. It's increasing rapidly, and they've worked out that it's mainly in the sort of metropolitan or more developed country type living females at reproductive age. The highest group are sort of a bit earlier than us, around 40 to 49, and we tend to get it a bit later. This is the rate that China had previously. You can see it's down near the middle Africa. So back in the day it was traditional sort of green plant-based diet with lots of rice and a little bit of meat if you're lucky, like some pig or beef for a lot of the population. And you see how North America's up there? That's what Prof. Shaw was talking about with that nice arrow that he had, the development, yes, that's right. And basically I think Western Europe, North America and Australia and New Zealand, we're right up there in terms of incidence, right? So it's very interesting because you've got places like West Africa, Central Africa, Melanesia, they're pretty undeveloped and they don't have a high rate of breast cancer. So something's changing, but China is unfortunately going up towards our sort of rates. They worked out that the highest risk groups were high education level, which is interesting, engaging in scientific research, I'm not quite sure what that means, but maybe depressed, so there's that mood factor or the mental side. High body mass index, so the overweight, insulin, inflammatory side, high protein intake, and disharmonious marital life divorce. So in breast cancer, that's very interesting that they've sort of looked at a sort of more mind-body side of it. There was this high-risk age groups. They noticed that there was quite a bit of induced abortion early on in the woman's history, late age of first pregnancy, which we know about as well, oral contraceptive use, lack of breastfeeding, history of benign breast disease, which is probably another indicator of some iodine deficiency, which we'll talk about later on, family history of breast cancer, which we know about, late menopause and passive smoking. So they're all the things that they sort of highlighted. And so they decided to try and improve their mental health, get a suitable age to get married and pregnant. So very Chinese, that's right. That was good. Ideally, I think you're in obstetrics and that you're like a geriatric if you're over 28. So I think they want to do, under 28. It's kind of, and I thought that'd be something we could do for the future generations, So, anyway, they're trying to reduce the induced abortions and encourage breastfeeding and prolong the lactation period. So that was it. And then they wanted to put in this thing of going back to a plant-based food because they looked at like Shanghai and there's different cities and the women are eating a lot of like fast takeaway fatty meats, so they've got those bad fats in them. They are also using a lot of the contraceptive pill where they probably didn't so much anymore, and they're sitting a lot. They're in these sort of jobs where they're not really moving, so they've decided they should go on a plant-based food, it says plant-based, but it should be plant-based food, not animal-based, exercise, quit the smoking, less alcohol, and get into detecting it early. So that's pretty sensible. And then on the plant-based diet, there was a lady called, very good name, Jane Plant, right? And she's she looks into geophysics, and she can tell you how much copper there is on an island in Scotland, So she analyses all of England for its minerals and various things like that. But she had the misfortune of getting breast cancer herself. And she really, because she's a scientist, she really got interested in what can I do to fix this up, because she got to the stage where it was metastasizing and spreading. And she had some interesting books about your life in your hands, and talks a lot about dairy actually, and taking dairy out and going on more plant-based and cleaning up your diet. And that's one that you may want to have a look at just from a point of view of a scientist that's done some work for herself around getting her cancer to regress. So there's also infections, which we know that viruses damage the DNA, and maybe not so much specifically an infection in the breast, or maybe we will find that eventually, but at this stage there would be things like the chronic herpes infection that the woman has, that's bringing down her overall immunity. The hepatitis C she has, it's bringing down the immunity. These human papillomaviruses that are creating the cervical changes. So we know there's infections that go in and affect the DNA. And then there's the thing about toxic hormones, so the oral contraceptive pill use, suppressing your normal fluctuation and cycle of hormones. The Women's Health Initiative was, I should say initiative there actually, but the Women's Health Initiative study was the one where after that came out and they found after a period of time a lot of women in this particular age group had more problems with some cancer coming out and illness. So at that point GPs were kind of broadly blanket, like don't prescribe HRT anymore. And it's kind of interesting to think, well, what was it about the hormones that those women were taking? And was it in fact the progestin rather than natural progesterone that acted like a bit of a Trojan horse and went into the cell, created some DNA changes and damaged the DNA and created that increased cancer that we see? Just a question there for you, but following from Prof. Shaw's talk, it'd be interesting to look more into that. And I've got a little bit of research later that they really haven't worked that out yet, like why did the women have more cancer on the HRT? But that's one idea. So we know that lack of pregnancy and breastfeeding tends to create an increased risk. So it's actually lack of that long-term hormonal, like when you're pregnant, your progesterone goes really high, and that seems to have some protective effect. And when you're breastfeeding for periods of time, you're actually having this interesting, you're not actually ovulating often, which is a bit different to the idea of cycling hormones. But they've worked out that women that breastfeed and have the pregnancy earlier don't get so much breast cancer. There's also hormones like insulin. Leptin is that one that has to do with appetite, and the metabolites of estrogen are being looked at quite a lot, which is these groups like 2-hydroxy and so on. That it's not just estrogen itself, it's what it becomes and then what it does to the cells that's more the issue. And there's a lot of work being done around how do you keep the estrogen healthy. And there's substances like diindole methane, which is a broccoli-based kind of extract from the brassica family that helps the estrogen health. Okay, so this is that big Women's Health Initiative. You don't have to read all this and there's no examination later, but basically it was a lot of women, 27,000, and they did a thing where they put about 16,000 of them with an intact uterus onto estrogen plus the fake progesterone, the progestin. So it's a chemically altered progesterone. And then they had estrogen alone. And the rates of overall illness and the death were 12% higher in women taking estrogen plus progestin. So that was a bit where the media and GPs kind of stopped and we said, oh, we better just look into this. Is it really healthy for women or not? And then women taking estrogen alone, the rates of overall illness and death were similar to those for placebo. But they differ by age. So for women taking estrogen alone in their 50s, there was a 16% reduced risk of overall illness and death. So those were the ones that didn't have the fake progestin, they just had the estrogen. And they had reduced illness and death in that sort of age when they probably should have had some hormones. So there's this whole concept kind of evolving. I was looking on, PubMed and the research and that of like, should we use perimenopausal support when women are losing their hormones quite early on and don't have the hormones there to help support the breasts anymore? Does it actually help health? And interesting enough, the estrogen on its own in the older sort of in their 70s had more illness, although their bones are probably better, but there's still work to be done on that, yeah. Okay, so this is the latest sort of one of the ones I could find on progestins and breast cancer. And they were looking at the use of different types of HRT, basically. And it still remains controversial in the sense that when you expose the breast cell to the progestin, initially there's a incredible kind of proliferative burst. So the cells, you get more cells and division, and that's not good for cancer. But then on continuing to expose them, they actually started to be inhibited. So there's this idea of, well, what do we do? And also there seemed to be improved mortality, survival rates for women with breast cancer when there had been some hormones in the mix. So does it in fact create some kind of advantage having hormones around? There's this other aspect to progesterone inhibiting the growth of tumours and creating what's called apoptosis, which is like natural programmed cell death. And basically, in life and in the laboratory, if you like, the progesterone has the ability to get the cancer cells to die. So it seems like a useful quality. It would sort of go in keeping with having pregnancy and long periods of high progesterone helping you prevent breast cancers. And progesterone, here's another one, inducing natural cell death and upregulation of that protein that Professor Saw talked about, which is this one called P53. Apparently it's based on the weight of the protein or something. And it can suppress the tumours. So progesterone has been shown to reduce the risk, in this case, of ovarian cancer and actually create this natural cell program death. All right, so how do we repair our DNA? So repair means to sort of restore something that's been damaged or faulty or worn out to good condition. So what substances actually help us repair the genetics? So once they've been in action, how can we reverse it, if you like? Just before I get into that, there's this thing you keep hearing about. Who's heard about the BRCA genes from Time magazine? Or yep, okay, Angelina Jolie, etc. So the BRCA genes actually tumour suppressor protein, so that's good, right? But unfortunately, some families have this altered gene in the family inherited, and it means that they're not good at repairing the DNA breaks. So over time, they're more likely to get ovarian and breast cancers. So the BRCA gene itself is a good gene, it's just when it's been altered or changed. And so there are tests that families with high incidences of ovarian and breast cancer and so on are doing just to check if they've got that gene. And them being either hypervigilant about the development or super good about keeping themselves healthy, or in the case of Angelina Jolie, removing the offending organs, you know. So what else helps repair DNA? All right, so it's really interesting because when you look at DNA damage, it sounds like this really bad thing, but it actually happens in our bodies over 10,000 times a day for the sake of giving you a number, but there's this process called oxidation and reduction, right, in the body biochemistry, which is oxidation is this thing where in that process the DNA is being used and actually altered and changed and broken, and then we repair it, and there's all these interaction and balance, if you like, between breaking and repairing all day long. And it's only when that goes out of balance, right, that the damage is too much, and the cell can do one of three things. It can either go into a state of senescence or sleep. It can become completely apathetic and decide never to divide again. It can commit cell suicide, which is apoptosis, which is this natural cell death. And a lot of the sort of upcoming nutritional medicine and tumour treatments are trying to get these cells that have gone rampant, if you like, to go back to programming themselves to die naturally and leave the healthy cells around them. So that's quite an important concept of how do you get the cell to go, actually, I'm not really a healthy cell, I've got damaged DNA, I need to die. And then when we get into trouble is when the cells grow too much and there's this unregulated cell division and things get out of control and there's this sort of random growth and random motion through the body, it's not sticking to where it should be. So this is quite a big list, but basically these are some of the sort of health warriors, if you like, things that repair us or prevent damage. I'm going to go into them in more details, but just so you can see an overview. So there are things that neutralize radiation or block it nutritionally. There are things that help clean out toxins. So if you are exposed to xenoestrogens and so on, how do you get them out of your body? There are things that help repair DNA, natural substances. There are natural sort of cell killer agents that help encourage the cells to die naturally. There are things that can blast infection and viruses out of the body. There are immune boosters, including herbal medicine. There's endocrine system balancers, so hormones, natural hormones versus synthetic hormones versus herbs. There are lymphatic supporters, because you've got a whole lymph system that's supposed to go around and take all the white cells and clean up things and take it through to the blood circulation again, so you can actually do the rubbish collection job and clean up these cells out of your body. There's the ones that prevent metastatic spread and angiogenesis. Angiogenesis means creating new blood vessels. You know, like thermography, you're looking for hot spots, new blood vessels. There's markers you can do in the genetic makeup to see if you've got a tendency with your tumour to make new blood vessels. Tumours spread by growing too much and then making new blood vessels and finding ways through your systems. And there are some substances that actually help to stop that. Then we've got things that support the cellular matrix so you don't have all these toxins just sitting there. And we have cellular energy creators, so things that actually help the cellular energy systems. And there's this whole environmental biofield, energetic field around you, or the environment around the body. There's the mental energy restorer, so you're more positive and wanting to actually survive and get well. And there's the sort of spiritual approaches, or looking at the idea that you will be well. So this is radiation protector. So he's got his zinc cream on his nose, he's got his hat, and he's got his top on. So zinc is a very good substance, actually. It's a metal, and it's actually a natural radiation blocker. We use it a lot in the chemistry in the planet to galvanise materials so they'll survive, like under the sea, or they won't get rusted and things like that. And there's over 200 enzymes in the body that actually rely on zinc to actually go in with a protein, metalloproteins they're called, and actually sort of help heal things and build white cells and things like this. So zinc is one of your things you think about for blocking radiation effects on the body with a physical cream or having a good levels in your body. Nicotinic acid is often deficient in the cell when it's exposed to radiation. It uses up niacin or B3, and you need antioxidants. These are these things that stop the cell from rusting, if you like, or being inflamed. So you've got things like vitamin C and vitamin A and vitamin E. They'll help repair and mop up all these free radicals, they're called, or chemicals that create inflammation. There's the practical thing of the radiographer wearing the lead-lined suit, so again, a metal preventing radiation. And then there's the whole range of things called electromagnetic field protection devices, including tektites, which are parts of a meteorite that came to the Earth that people put in their fields, through to copper devices and pyramids and things. And there are people that work on this area. It's not something that I'm so familiar with, but how to actually clean up. Well, the bit that makes sense to me is that, 10,000 years ago, we didn't all have wireless phones, computers, cell phone towers, etc. And there's what does the impact of all that going through our bodies have on our health and the cellular matrix? Like I was showing you the snowflakes. So what impact does that have on the order or disorder or damage of our DNA and the complex matrices of the cell? And there's a whole spectrum of electromagnetic radiation. The actual cell, you'll see in the middle, it's a bit small, but up the top there's a little picture of a cell, and down the bottom there's some people. That's sort of in the middle of, near the sort of visible light, if you like, and infrared is just on the left of that, and then you've got ultraviolet light on the right. So that's kind of where we sort of happily sit in the electromagnetic spectrum. And the body, unfortunately, it's not designed to go to sort of minus 273 Kelvin and get really frozen. It's got a very narrow band in which it can survive. And harmonically, these waves that we've now generated, if you like, along with generating lots of chemicals, we've managed to generate lots of waves. And we have everything from the sort of, what have we got there, like radiation at the top right here with very short wavelengths, through to things that have lot longer wavelengths like microwaves and different things like that actually, even the radios and so on. So that can be a bit overwhelming. Like you think, well, what do I do? I'm living in that environment. There are people that specialise in this area, like Paul Waddell, he's in Auckland, and he actually can go through your house and check, he's got some really interesting meters. He can read the amounts of electromagnetic radiation and help you clean up your home, if you like, so that you can have, instead of having wireless, you have phones that plug in or computers that plug in, and so on. So it's just a practical way to decrease the sort of electromagnetic exposure. And then there's the toxin or detox prevention. So with cigarettes, basically you can quit. There's often the case of, which is the epigenetics thing, of your parents smoked. And I have a lot of patients who parents in the 50s or 60s, they didn't really realise they smoked while they were watching the TV in the lounge. You know, in the 60s, they smoked in the car. Some of them smoked while they were pregnant with the person that now has the breast cancer, etc. So there's been a sort of exposure to cigarettes that, I mean, it was pretty popular for doctors to smoke, I think, in the 50s, wasn't it? And nurses and so on. So it's been something where there's been a lot of education on it, and it's often the toxins that are grown and manufactured with the tobacco that are the problem. These toxic metals, you can basically see a holistic dentist if you want to, and even better, you know, don't have them put in the first place in the future generations that are coming. So putting mercury into the mouth is not necessarily a smart idea. And there's a whole environmental campaign in terms of how do we keep our oceans clean. So anything you can do from a community level to help that would help future generations and their DNA. You've got what sort of paints do you use now? We've got lead out of the petrol. It's still sitting around in the environment, but at least we're starting to look at, well, we better take that out. A bit like Prof. Shaw was saying, you know, they took the lining out of the inside of the can out once they realised it was harmful. So as a group, we're starting to realise maybe we shouldn't all cook with aluminium pans because they've looked at, you know, the brains of Alzheimer patients and there seems to be bits of aluminium in there and things like this. So it's just a learning curve as a species, if you like. So we've got all the toxic plastics. We've got, there's a lot of eco products that you can get, and you probably already know. Who here uses some eco products already? Yes, exactly. Okay. So you've probably already done a big clean-up of your house. Personal hygiene. You know the old rolling the aluminium under your arm for years on end with your breast being just near it, and then your mercury from your teeth coming down, and your root canal that is a dead tooth that drains the bacteria into the mouth. All these things kind of contribute to the cellular homeostasis not being so great for the breast. We have water filters you can use now because you've got fluoride and chloride and the various halogen group from the periodic table that actually displaces iodine out of your breast, and iodine stays there to help keep your breast metabolism and health and hormonal health. We've got the clean air concept, you know, with carbon monoxide and the petrol. We've got toxic foods. So there's this whole thing of organic whole foods. And Sue, who writes for the Breast Cancer Network, was telling me a lovely story about a lady at 60, changed her whole diet from, you know, fairly refined foods to very whole foods and lived another sort of 40 years, was it? Something like that? Yeah. 47 years, yes. So not that that's going to happen to everybody, but it's just the concept of it's never too late. And also that this whole removal of inflammation and the processing, because it's really this sort of industrial era, developed country, metals, toxins, chemicals, processing that's sort of impacting on us in quite a big way. So you could say you could avoid too much of those synthetic progestins or fake hormones and overeating and so on. That's just an example of a company that does all these eco-type products. They've taken out a lot of these worrying xenoestrogens and so on. And that's a company, just an example of a company that does you know, detoxing and alkaline water filters, and they have jugs that you can fill up and so on. So then the champion detoxes in terms of nutritional medicine. The B vitamins are a good group, especially what are called activated B vitamins. There's in chemistry we have a carbon-oxygen engine, and if you take some carbon and put 3 hydrogens with it, you get something called methyl. It's a methyl group, right? And that's right, isn't it, Prof? Okay, good. Yeah, I got that bit right. So then that group is the one that he was just talking about can switch things on and off in our bodies. And some people they're finding in their genetics they're not very good at doing this process of creating this activation of the B vitamins or methylating things. So you can take B12 on the outside, or you can take folic acid in the plain form, but you're just genetically not able to convert it, or there's something blocking it, like a toxin, like mercury, from those enzymes that would normally convert it in your liver and so on. So in the B vitamins, you want to have sort of live, sourced, fresh. If you're taking supplements, look for what are called activated B vitamins. It's things like folinic acid rather than just folic acid. There's research now on giving mums folinic acid prenatally and helping to create a really nice milieu for the baby and preventing some of these things like the autistic spectrum with the epigenetics of the damage and inflammation to the brain and gut. And really, bees are one of the champion detoxes in the body, and very simple. If you're vegetarian, there's ways of getting them from fermented foods. If you're into meats or grass-fed organic foods. There's like the red meats have a lot of Bs and egg yolks. Then we've got vitamin C, which could be a whole lecture on itself on bioflavonoids and the use of oral, liquid, organic, intravenous, and so on. It's an incredible antioxidant and detoxer. There's even work on citrus pectins, which is like the sort of fleshy bit of the citrus fruit, and modifying them so that they actually help to prevent that metastatic spread of cancers in things like prostate and breast, those sort of more hormonal type cancers. There's minerals which detox you, so zinc, selenium, magnesium, they're all involved in many, many enzyme pathway. Enzymes are chemicals that help create change in the body. So you want to have good change, you want to clean things out, you want to clean these chemicals out. So even though you are exposed to the chemicals, you're not one of the 1 in 10, you're one of the 9 in 10 that doesn't get the cancers. We do create tumour cells in our body and destroy them all the time. It's just whether it gets out of balance. So then there's the omegas. These things also help prevent metastatic spread and keep the blood flowing and keep the inflammation down. And they help with that metabolic syndrome, which Peter Tunbridge was talking about. Omega-9 is one that's a new one you probably hear about. It was, I think Dr. Oz maybe mentions it or something. But not that I've seen that show, but I've heard from patients is sea buckthorn berries, I think it is. Anyway, it's omega-9 and it's in things like macadamia nuts and fish and so on. And it actually is incredible at stopping the insulin and that whole metabolic overweight thing. And you'll see supplements with algae and omega-9 and so on that you can take. Then you've got your greens and cleaning out your liver through juicing. You've got, on that, probably vegetable juices rather than high sugar juices are where you want to go. Chlorella and clean clays, so finding clean clays on this planet, the ones like bentonite, that actually remove toxic metals and things from your gut and from your cells. There's Epsom, the old Epsom salt baths, which is magnesium sulfate, and having a soak in that, there's this idea of getting some transdermal magnesium and cleaning things out with the sulfur. Then you've got the old saunas, so you've got infrared, Swedish dry saunas, and actually getting that cellular matrix to clean itself out and sweat out the toxins. It's used a lot in places like Russia. I mean, they go in, they hit themselves with the pieces of the pine, and they have saunas a lot. And actually, if you get the body active and moving and sauna and then take various a vegetable-based diet and clean things out of your body, you're going to help your cells to detox. And then the gut bacteria, there's a whole raft of research being done on the fact that you've got more bacteria in your gut than you do cells in your body. And these bacteria are intimate to producing things like folic acid and hormones and natural substances in the gut that actually help detox things. So they'll probably find out even more on this, like, there's particular yeasts and bacteria in that can eat things like mercury out of you or remove it out of your gut and so on. And then there's exercise and rebounding and so on that detoxes you and gets your body moving. So these are just some examples of detox methods or programs or books. Body ecology diet is how to have like an internal healthy gut. And clean is where it looks at having like a big meal in the middle of the day and having sort of juices and smoothies at the end of the day and just allowing enough time for your body to detox. Most of your detox occurs often at night when you're asleep and you haven't eaten so much. You've got time, fasting time, to let the body clean out. So then we have repairers. So you have things like selenium that help repair the DNA. So these are like nutrients that can actually help repair. Vitamin A actually helps repair sun-damaged skin. Vitamin B3 again, B9 and B12. B9 is folic acid. You've got vitamin D, stabilizes DNA. And vitamin E actually is another, as I said, a free radical scavenger, so it stops that rusting process in the body. This is just a study showing you that low doses of selenium specifically stimulate the repair of oxidative DNA damage. So even though these things have come in and damaged it, the selenium actually can help repair that. And there's some good studies you'll see between countries that have low selenium versus countries that have high selenium naturally in the soil. And in New Zealand, do we have low or high selenium? Low, good, okay. So that's an important nutrient. And what's a food you can get selenium from? Exactly. We're all good. All right, so then what if you're wondering about your genes? You know, after all this talk about DNA and so on, and there are gene maps that can be done, and people are starting to pay money and send, you know, a swab from the inside of their cheek to see what genes they have. There's a New Zealander moved to Australia and started a company called Smart DNA Test, where you can look at your innate ability to do some of these metabolic pathways. How good are you at detoxing? How good are you at methylating? How good are you at handling these toxic load that we have? There's this MTHFR is a big abbreviation, but it's basically to do with this folic acid getting this group called the carbon and the hydrogen attached to it, and whether you can do that or not. And you can do a free test in New Zealand with your GP to see if you're good at that or not, if you need to think about it in terms of what form of folic acid are you taking. Your other option is just to take methylated folic acid forms, with folinic acid, which is the active one. There are gene testing services, but they have a specific protocol. It's not for everybody, but if you have that high rates in your family of ovarian and breast cancer, and there are breast centres that we have in Auckland that help advise you whether you should do any genetic testing or not. So that's the company, just one of them. There's another one, 23andMe in the US and so on, but you can send them away. I think it's around $100. I mean, you get like, it covers 100 DNA changes, and you'll sort of, what's your profile, if you like. And you get back all these numbers, and you need to be a scientist to kind of work it out, but they also give you a summary that you can go over with your doctor and see what it's all about, you know. This is an example of a centre that does the BRCA gene testing, and they offer advice and counselling around that and whether you need it or not. But these are in Auckland. So the natural cell killers. So we want those cancer cells to die. And vitamin D is incredible, encouraging natural cell death or apoptosis. It creates also a substance called cathelicidin, which is like a natural antiviral antibiotic in your body. So if there is a viral or infective element to cancer, vitamin D is your friend. Iodine, it pushes out these toxic halides, if you like, and it helps estrogen metabolism. It's incredibly important. And again, Japanese diet is rich in iodine. New Zealand diet, are we good or bad on iodine usually? Bad, yeah, we don't usually have a lot. But we're starting to, we started with iodizing the salt, but then we put aluminium as the free-flowing agent in the salt, which wasn't so good. But we're starting to get more iodine and kelp and things like that back into our diet. And iodine in bread, exactly. Yeah, good. So, and the thing about iodine prenatally as well now, with GPs, we can prescribe iodine to women. And that's funded on the government funding. So then there's things like the selenium helps kill those cancer cells. Zinc, again, strengthens the white cells and the immune. Iodine also strengthens your white cells, so they'll go and actually find a weak cell and eat it, like actually phagocytosis it's called. So they're actually very good minerals. Then there's the immunoglobulins. You want to have your immune proteins responding and in good shape. There's vitamins like K2, which is from naturally fermented foods like natto. It's a Japanese food, doesn't taste that great, but miso, there's, and then the probiotics like fermented foods like the kefirs. And that book, Body Ecology Diet, goes all into a lot about how to get fermented foods into your body. And there's also substances like the old Indian-style spices like curcumin, and there's actually research coming out on curcumin and creating natural cell death, and they're looking at activated forms of curcumin. But turmeric, you know, the yellow stuff you put on your chicken curry, that's right. So this is one that, when I was giving a talk, Jim Bartley, who's an ear, nose and throat specialist, but also has a very strong interest in vitamin D, said, oh, you've got to show them this, you've got to show them this. This is the Women's Health Initiative, who said, you know, stop hormone replacement, actually had a bit of a look at their 27,000 women, and they found that the ones that had been taking calcium and vitamin D actually decreased the risk of total breast and colorectal cancers. So that was very interesting. It said it didn't change the risk of fractures or total mortality, but it definitely decreased the cancers, so it was very interesting. And this is a slide courtesy of Jim, where he's basically vitamin D, it does slow the cell growth of the cancer cells, repairs the DNA damage, stops the tissue invasion to spread, and inhibits new blood vessel growth and destroys cancer cells. So what's the optimal vitamin D level? In Europe, they think it should be about 50. In Auckland, we have a bone health range that you'll see on the form if you pay the $50 to do the test. It goes between 50 and 150. But that dose might be good for bones, but it might be not enough to kill the cancers, infections, and muscle strength, because vitamin D actually helps make your shoulders and your hip muscles very strong and good muscle tone. And there's some, like Brisbane goes from 50 to 300, and North Americans starting to feel that maybe it should be around 100 in your vitamin D. So it's something you can look into. In New Zealand, I check a lot of vitamin Ds. Often the women are around 47. Men 52, Europeans around 50. This is some figures of levels, and you'll see that it's sort of lower in the winter and lower in the South Island. And this is an interesting one in the USSR, between the rates of breast cancer and the sunlight calories per centimetre per day. And up the left, we have a high rate in countries like Latvia and Estonia that are away from the sun. And then we go down to the more sort of sun-blessed countries like Uzbekistan and so on. And they're actually getting more sunlight and less rates of breast cancer. These are just some other things about those other nutrients that I had. So I'm just showing you snippets of that there's research around. Vitamin K2 is this one that comes out of fermented foods and a healthy gut environment. It actually helps natural cell death. Iodine induces that natural cell death in human breast carcinoma cells. And curcumin, the turmeric, actually involves pathways that create natural cell death. So then you want your cellular energy, your matrix support. That's your clean water, clean greens, coenzyme Q10. It's, if you like oily, small fermented fish, you can eat those. But you can get forms of it that are liquid, and it helps keep the oxygenation and repair of all those cellular mechanisms. I just put shockwaves there just to remind us that matrix can be impacted by injuries and surgery and affects the communication systems around the breast. You've got detox, which actually cleans out that cellular matrix. And digestive enzymes is an interesting one. There's more work being done on taking things like bromelain and papain, pawpaw, pineapple, and actually helping break down some of these like structures that actually mean that your immune system can't get in and affect the cancer cells. So digestive enzymes or enzymes that help break down the wall structures of tumours and things like that to break them down. And I put breathing there just to remember that oxygen and things like not hyperventilating or over-breathing affect the balance of oxygen and carbon dioxide in the body. All right, so the lymphatic circulation, it's our hidden ally. It gets pumped around with things like rebound. Has anyone here ever used a rebounder? Or, okay, good, yeah. Or trampolining or running. And then there's things like body brushing people do to help the lymph. There's this concept of bra time. I think, Paul, you're looking into that. Or, yeah, like how much time do you spend in a bra? Do you have metal in the bra or not? And does that affect the lymphatics? And it's worth, you have time at night when you're not in a bra, but we're all wearing bras more. Does that impact things? It's something it's just to raise the question of it, really. Theoretically, it'd be good to have lymph flow around that area, right? So then breast cancer is less in those that exercise, and that's just some research showing physical activity and cancer prevention. So the more you move the body, the less it has an improvement in less cancer rates. And then we've got balancing the endocrine system, which is that hormonal system. Things like fatigue, progesterone deficiencies, your thyroid health, which I think was talked about earlier, keeping a rhythm to the body day and night. And there's this thing about future generations, like the Chinese said, having children younger and breastfeeding lots, right? Okay. And then keeping the traumas. If you have a trauma, there's healing and massage and things like that you can do to the area. Keeping the gut health helps keep your environmental field. And I think I just gave you a little to-do list here, which is this thing of simple idea of in your environment, taking a walk every day, looking outwards, because we can often have attention inwards or anxiety or grief or whatever, and it's a way to kind of put your attention on the trees and the life out there rather than on what's going on here and affect the immune system and the body. The turning off the bad news sources is just a little way of saying, if someone's constantly telling you you're no good or negative towards you or angry towards you or something like that, that needs to be reviewed and either handled with communication or you don't have a lot to do with that person. The same can be on, listening to the radio on the way here. I heard about the number of people that had died of the Ebola virus, the situation in Syria, and one other bit of good news before I even got here. So it's whether you want to be exposed to that all the time. And in your health, with breast health, you want to keep yourself in a more pleasurable sort of pro-survival approach. So then there's the mindfulness and spirituality, which you're going to be looking at this afternoon. The only time really is now, is the concept. And so if we're worrying and anxious and stricken with grief and losses and things like that, it's going to have an effect on those cellular chemistry and the cells and whether we develop tumours or not and things like that. And there's this concept that the cells respond to our desire to be well again or to stay well if you're preventing it, having intention on the present and creating that with pleasure and so on. And there's just this food for thought concept of that your decisions influence you, because in the Western world it's quite materialistic and there's the idea you're a body and it's all material, but there's in the Eastern world there's the idea of, in things like Buddhism and so on, that you're spiritual and that your thoughts and ideas impact on the physical structure of the body. So that would relate to illness and wellness and things like that. All right, so then summary, avoid excess, I guess is the way to summarize it. So you don't want too many toxins, chemicals, radiations, sugars, unhealthy fats, and control your inflammation and your insulin. You want to increase your detox and plant-based foods and cleaning out your systems. You want to get adequate sunshine and have those key vitamins like vitamin D and minerals like the selenium and iodine and so on. You want to get clean water and a clean environment and clean up the electromagnetic fields if you can. You want to have pleasure and remove sort of the suppressive elements or the impact of those around us on your life urge, if you like, because if you don't really want to be around, then it's hard to get well. And then working to be present and finding some kind of activity with purpose, so you've got somewhere to head, All right, so that's the sort of holistic health approach again. So you've got the spiritual side with the ideas, the emotional harmonics and the effects of losses and trauma and grief on creating cancer. You've got the body with its biofield and the traumas and the ways you can heal that up, and then the cellular DNA map and the inner repair systems of the body that you can work with and optimize. There's some recommended reading. I mean, that's just a simple one on the left is like a breast cancer prevention guide. You can find these kind of books like Sandra Cabot, she's an Australian doctor that did a lot of work on liver cleansing and things. And on the right, it's an Australian couple who actually wrote a book after they looked at all the research about what kind of foods and minerals and what doses and what fats are healthy and what carbs are healthy, and it's quite a good read. And they got themselves healthy by doing all that research and then wrote it up, basically. So your to-do list, if you were having a to-do list, would be to either get your vitamin D checked or just make sure you're getting enough vitamin D, because you saw what it did, and there's a lot of evidence that it can really help prevent cancer and help kill off the cells. And make sure you do get some selenium, iodine, and trace minerals. New Zealand lacks trace minerals. Eat healthy fats. Don't go for rancid or trans fats or these margarines or things that have been too overcooked because they have a very inflammatory effect on the body. Manage the perimenopause. Don't just leave yourself miserable and without any kind of natural hormonal help if you need it. And the idea of natural progesterone in pregnancy and more pregnancies helping prevent breast cancer, you might want to look at that area. And then keep yourself moving. Okay, so that's my thoughts on that for you. Thanks very much.